Hello, hello. How are you guys doing? I hope everyone's having a good day so far. Sorry if my voice is a little meh right now. I woke up not too long ago. Yeah, currently I only do YouTube. I have a Streamlabs account. And once I start doing this pretty regularly and I get a regular audience of people, I'll start cross streaming between YouTube and Twitch. Hey Candy. Hell yeah. Yeah, I just woke up not that long ago, but I told myself I was gonna get up and do this because I'm motivated and, you know, gotta keep going with the grind. Oh, thank you. I'm currently playing, it's a song called Love by Colorful Cat. And I just have like a playlist of like lo-fi music that I generally play whenever we get ready to do streams and stuff. Just because this is all copyright free music. And plus some of the beats are like really sick though. But yes, I am hoping everyone is having a good day so far, and that you guys are being healthy, happy, and are looking forward to a wonderful live stream. I'm so excited, and there's a few announcements that I have to make first. I don't know. I think I'm gonna do for 100,000 like I planned before. Just because, I mean, I kind of died for a little bit just because, you know, life, work, stress, all that good shit. So I think I'm just gonna wait for 100K. Not to be that person, but yeah. And I'm also in the process of like possibly maybe creating like a cute little VTuber like avatar. Because I have this thing where, like, you guys may not find it, like, particularly, whatever, no big deal, yada, yada, yada. But for me, I just think it's really awkward for me to be on camera for extended periods of time. Especially if I'm gaming and stuff like that. Hey, hopeful generation. But I just feel really awkward being on camera for extended periods of time, especially if we're like playing video games or something like that. So I just figured I would go ahead and like try and either make one myself or get one made. I don't know. But again, it's just something that I will probably work on later on. Oh, thanks, Roger. Yeah, so but that's just my own like anxiety. Like I just don't like, I mean, I wouldn't say it's really an anxiety. It's just, to me, it's really awkward to be on camera for extended periods of time, especially if I'm like setting up or, you know, looking at something or reading something, you know, or if like stories going on in a video game. I don't want to, you know, I just don't like being on camera like that, you know. So VTube avatars are super expensive though. So I'm trying to find a program where I can like kind of make one from scratch and go from there. Hey Pitt. But yeah, we'll see how that goes. I got two things to talk about before we get started. One is I'm currently trying to work on like putting together an actual streaming package where I have like, you know, the be right back and like the transitions and all that stuff. Hey Maze. So I think what I may end up doing is I'm either gonna get someone to get some stuff commissioned for me, or I'm gonna go through the process of like animating and making my own stuff myself. Hello. Yeah, thanks for coming, everybody. But that's the first thing is I'm gonna work on putting together a streaming package and trying to work out a budget. Like I gotta do some budgeting here and there for possibly doing the Streamlabs thing, because a lot of people are just like, oh, I love that, you know, you stream, I wish you streamed on, you know, Twitch. And I'm like, okay, so but I also don't want to neglect my YouTube audience that I stream regularly for. So when I looked up information on Streamlabs, you can cross stream between both Twitch and YouTube, and it's all on one platform. But unfortunately, in order to multi-stream, I have to go Prime, and Prime costs money every month. So I kind of want to hold off on doing that until I can like budget some things out, and go from there. Especially with like, you know, managing finances and stuff, and especially since, you know, freaking I got bills to pay and all that crap. So that's fun. But yeah, anyway, the second thing I want to talk about is, I know I'm late, or rather we're late. But Tommy and I have been putting together the Discord, and the Discord is finished. So I will provide the links for people. And yeah, it's pricey. So yeah, Discord has been made. Tommy did a lot of work putting it together. We're gonna try and like get some custom emotes and other stuff made, but for right now, it's just kind of the bare bones. So if you guys would like to have access to the Discord, just say so, and that will be put out. Aww. That's fine. Thank you, Green Octandom. Yeah, so Tommy, if you want to go ahead and link the Discord in the chat, by all means, go ahead. Yes, Candy, I do plan on finishing Higurashi. Like I said before, a lot of the files got corrupted whenever I was working on it because I wasn't playing it through Steam. And my version was also heavily modded because I had the sprites from the PlayStation 2 video game in there, and the text was different and all this other shit. So basically the files were old. They got a little bit corrupted, so I cannot go back to where I was in the game. So I bought the game on Steam, like the entire 8 episodes. There's an actual modding community through Steam that actually modded all of the sprites, different music, text, everything. Basically they did everything that I did, except they did it way better. So I'm in the process of playing through the game where I last left off, and then once I get to that point where I last left off in the game, I will resume recording and putting those episodes out as well. So yeah, anyway, Discord information, Tommy has it. So if you guys, like I said, Tommy, you can go ahead and link that in the chat. After the stream is over, I will edit the information. I will pin a comment in the video. I will pin a comment with the link to the Discord. I will also tweet out the Discord link for people, and I will put that information also in my Abouts page and all that good shit. So But yeah, Discord is there. You should be able to request stories. There's an archive of stories that I've already read. You can subscribe to get video updates. You can subscribe to get live stream updates. There's also a little section where people can like chat, where we can watch movies, game, all that stuff. So yeah, that's pretty much where we're going with that. Super excited. It was a lot of work, so thank Tommy for putting it all together, because I don't really do all that shit. That's kind of her expertise, where she goes in and does shit like that. I'm pretty basic when it comes to that shit. So yeah, thank her. She's the one who put it all together. It was a week and a half in the making, so beautiful. And okay, so with that being said, those are my 2 announcements. Oh, I just bumped my microphone, my bad. So yeah, those are my 2 announcements, and I know you guys were looking forward to a video update this week. It's just been kind of hellish this week. Next week I have to work a 6-day week. I only get 1 day off next week, so I'm going to be a little bit strained out. All right, have fun, Pitt. Thanks for coming by. Yeah, so things have been a little strained. Okay, so there's not to say that a video isn't coming. I did record several things. I was also waiting on people to get back to me with permissions of stuff that I could read. And I was going through a backlog archive of things that I did get permission from people in the past about. So I read a few things, recorded a few things, and now I just have to put the video together. And again, you guys know it's not just me like throwing my audio track in there and putting a background music track in there. Like, I do the whole 9 yards. So it's going to take me a minute. It has been a while since I've really like done full-blown audio engineering editing. So I got one video halfway done. I just got to get the other half of it finished, and then I can edit the footage and then render it and then upload it. So it'll be okay. I'm used to working 6 days. See, the cool thing is, here's the cool thing. So even though I'm working 6 days next week and I only get 1 day off, the following week I'll get to have a 3-day weekend. So that's not bad. Like, I can handle that. That's okay. It's kind of an arrangement that me and my it's kind of an arrangement that me and my coworker kind of came up together with. So if I have to fill in for him, then I get to take a day off the next week. So it works out perfect. But yeah, so those are my 2 announcements. I see people popping up in the Discord. My phone is going off like crazy. Yeah, I had a hiccup, my bad. I went to go drink some water too. Alrighty. So yeah, my phone was going off like crazy. I'm gonna mute that real quick since I'm getting ready to do some live readings here. Hell yeah, Angel, send it to me. Oh gosh, I know, muting the phone. When I'm at work, I actually have to keep my phone on at all times just because I work in television news. So it's a whole to-do. Hello, Rioma. No, you're not late. Hey V8. You are not late. We just started. I'm actually getting ready to read some stuff, so you're just in time. Move this over here real quick so I can have this whole window to myself. Guys, I love having 2 monitors, let me just tell you. Love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. Love it so much. Alright. Let's squish this in a little bit. Okay. also got like a huge archive of like music and shit, so this will be interesting for sure. Alright, so just bear with me. I am in the process of getting this together. Alright. With that being said, let's get this together here. Oh, I didn't even switch the thing. Hold on. Let's do this real quick. Sorry about that, guys. Let's see. Alright, I'm in the process of like hunting through some audio stuff for a moment. So just bear with me. Hey, Garrettson. Hey! Oh, I'm glad you came through. Do I have a favorite type of creepypasta? I like horror, but like, okay, so I like psychological horror stuff. Like that to me is the most interesting type of horror. The kind where you're not sure if the narrator is crazy or not, or if they're seeing something and it's a figment of their imagination. That's the kind of like creepypasta I enjoy listening to, and I enjoy reading those kinds of stories. Personally, that's just my own personal, like, you know. Hello, Mark. Thank you so much. Okay. Alright, let's get into The Girl the Universe Forgot. I'll have to check that out. If you have a link for it, Queenie, let me know. Alright, let's get into the spooky stuff. Let's see here. Just a little bit over here. There we go. Oh, is it? Did I miss it? Maybe I scrolled too fast. Hold on, Tommy. Oh, I do see it. Okay. Well, we'll just put this up here. Ooh, it's a 32-minute read. Interesting. We might have to save this one for last. Okay. All right. First things first, though. Oh, yeah. And let's set the mood. All right. Okie dokie. All right, we got our bonfire. There should be channel links in the Discord. With actual like links to the channels for things. Just kind of scroll and go from there. Tommy will be in there to help people out if they get confused about something. All right, the first story of the night, though, is we're going to read Those Deep Dark Wells by Michael Page. So if you're ready, I will link you guys to the story in chat. Hey, Hussein. Nice to see you. All right, so this is going to be interesting. So we're going to go from here. Let me find an appropriate track. The terrible thing happened at night. As most terrible things do. When I clicked away at my home job as a transcriptionist, I'd often watch the boys playing in the background. They'd be at it for hours, acting out some scene with foam swords and plastic guns, only stopping when the sun left to rise elsewhere. Seeing Mason happy made me happy. He'd finally found a friend. His father left us when he was 6 months old and more or less held no role in his life. Sure, there were the occasional visits every few years, but even those were short and feigned, not even so much as an annual birthday card. Perhaps that was why Mason anchored himself such a secure distance from other kids, a point driven home by his 5th grade teacher and several others. Part of me didn't blame him. Kids in schools, especially the ones I can recall, weren't the friendliest bunch. If you were lucky, you could pick out the sharks from the minnows and avoid them, but honestly, they all look the same, twined together in the same concrete box. Please give him a best friend, I'd whisper at my bedside every night, sending out the same message to God, or at least to something just as benevolent to hear my prayer. give my son his first best friend. Then, one day, much to my wonderment, Mason brought Todd home for a play date. He was a petite boy with mismatched clothes, unkempt hair, and the bluest eyes you'd ever seen. I was ecstatic, relieved that my son had finally cracked open his shell and found a buddy. "I saw him at the park," Mason told me when I asked how they met. "He was sitting alone at the swings like he was sad. When he saw me on my bike, he waved and I waved back. Then we hung out and he was really cool." As he shared this, I couldn't help but smile at his excitement, so much deserved by the loneliest boy in the world. That night, they had a sleepover and passed out in the living room. From my bedroom, I could hear the muffled speech of our television, which they had left on. Sighing, I untucked myself out of bed and walked sluggishly down the stairs to them. Light from the screen pulsed and stretched over the sleeping boys. Mason was swaddled in his blanket on the floor, while Todd was curled up on the couch. I scanned for the remote, and after no luck, I moved to shut it off myself. Crick! A lone bag of chips crinkled under my foot. From the couch, Todd's shape twitched and then bolted upright. I meant to say sorry, but I was stopped short. When Todd jutted awake and opened his eyes, I couldn't see them. They hadn't rolled up in their sockets or slipped to their sides. They were simply gone. 2 holes of singular darkness. Todd had blue eyes, vividly blue eyes. But at that instant, not even the glow of the television reflected off those dark membranes, black as Santa's coal. Then he blinked, and the eyes returned. Before I could say anything, his mouth stretched into a yawn, and his body slumped back into the cushions. I was stiff as a board, somewhat relieved I hadn't shrieked and woken them both up. My thoughts told me it was a trick of the light, as did any speck of reason. Vision played games with you that way. I switched off the television and went back to bed. A few weeks later, on an especially windy evening, a knock came at the door. Todd was there as usual, seesawing on his soles patiently. "Hi there," I smiled. "Hi," he smiled, his thin neck cocked. "Can Mason come out and play?" Before I even had to answer, Mason had already squeezed past me, still working one of his arms through his jacket sleeve. "Bye, Mom." I watched as they disappeared down the street. The rule was to be back before dark, and to their credit, the boys always returned just as the sky started to dim. On that particular outing, they came home with some cool rocks they'd found in dirt-clotted sneakers. By the time Todd was ready to walk back home, it had fallen too dark for him to go alone. I gave him a ride with both boys in the back seat. It wasn't a far drive, as his house was only a few streets away. Every so often, my eyes would slip back to the rear view and see Todd watching the street, Mason dozing off next to him. As we passed beneath the street lamps, a bar of light would creep through the window, roll over his face, and vanish over his head. The car suddenly rocked as my wheels rolled too hastily over a speed bump. His gaze left the window and met mine. Only this time, as the slanted light skimmed over his features, blue eyes did not look back at me. They were gone, blotted out by the same oily darkness. Silent, murky circles. Even his skin, in just that quick moment, looked different. Like dry, mottled clay fit poorly over a skull, lips bloodlessly shriveled. I slammed on the brake, jostling all of us with a sudden lurch. Mason gasped himself into wide-awake awareness. As fast as it had happened before, the straight-faced horror in my backseat returned to a sweet young boy, shocked and surprised. "Sorry," I breathed. "Sorry about that, guys. I thought I saw a cat in the road." We reached Todd's house, a white ranch style with a flowering dogwood tree in the front yard. As the boys said their goodbyes, I could only stare in the dashboard, my heart sending tremors down my arms. The world felt off its tilt, as if the lines separating actuality and nonsense were blurred. I was disoriented by how real it seemed. His eyes like deep, dark wells, his unhealthy skin stretched and pulled like a death mask. My thoughts clashed with the fold of my brain that formed logic, and eventually logic won. It was all in my head. Period. But despite how far-fetched it sounded, I actively avoided eye contact with Todd, not even giving a sliver of opportunity for that oily pitch to return. If it even happened in passing, or a quick double take, I'd be back to circling the rim of a mental collapse. A week later, I went to pick up Mason from Todd's house. I pulled up along the curb, texted, "I'm here," and waited for some time. There was no sign he'd read my message, nor did he answer any of my calls. When I got tired of waiting, I twisted the keys out of the ignition and made my way up the slim walkway. The house was missing a great deal of shingles, which scarred its roofline in dark patches. The rain gutters were clogged and stunk of decomposing leaves. I knocked briskly and waited, the door unlocked, held only partially open by a door chain. "Yes?" the face peeking out asked. His voice was nasally, like it was lodged somewhere in his throat, right in the pit of it. "Hi, I'm Holly, Mason's mom, here to pick him up." The door closed and then opened fully as the chain slid out of its holder. The man on the other end was lanky with onset baldness widening his forehead, his eyes tired and heavy. "Oh, sorry about that," he said, flashing a thin-lipped smile and offering a handshake. "David, the boys are probably still on their way back, but they'll be here any minute now. You can come inside and wait if you'd like. I've got some tea ready to go." I took him up on his offer and followed him inside. At our immediate right was the living area, where a woman sat watching a rom-com on the television. Paying no mind to the sound at the door, she kept her back to us. Beneath the show's timed laugh track, I could hear the sound of hard, labored breathing. Hanging over the side of the sofa drooped a thin, skeletal wrist. On the wall, a gray Kit Kat clock shifted its eyes and wagged its tail. The kitchen was small, with a triangular arrangement of sink, stove, and refrigerator, a small dance between the three. Flowery wallpaper looped around the room. A formica-topped table sat against the wall with minty green chairs. I took a seat in one as David retrieved some cups from the cabinet. The smell of light orchid drifted through the air. "Hope you like green tea," he said quietly as he filled the cups and brought them over. "Green is fine," I replied, taking the cup from him. "Thank you." He planted himself in a chair. "They're really fond of each other, aren't they? The boys, I mean." "I'd say so. You can hardly keep Mason away." I laughed. By this point, I had noticed the dark pouches beneath his eyes more clearly. In fact, his overall appearance seemed to hang in a mournful sag. Whatever supplement he needed, he was missing a lot of it. "So, how long have you been in the neighborhood?" I asked for the sake of conversation. "Oh, a good while now," he mused, rubbing a finger along his cup. "Really? I'm surprised Mason didn't meet Todd sooner. Our houses aren't too far from each other." "Todd?" he asked, as though needing a moment to remember his own son's name. "Oh, yes, that is pretty surprising. He gets around. Mason never sees him at school. Does he go to a different school?" Lines creased his mouth. "School. Well, From the living room, a harsh guttural coughing reached us. David's neck swiveled toward the sound. "Excuse me, my wife needs me." He left his chair and hastily went to her. Not too long after that, the front door opened as Todd and Mason arrived. As we said our goodbyes to David and his silent wife, he clasped my hand in a tight shake. "It was nice meeting you, Holly. Really, it was." When he released his grip, I realized something was left in my palm. When we were back in the car, I folded it open. "What's that, Mom?" Mason asked. "Nothing, sweetie," I smiled back at him, placing the crumpled note in my lap. A phone number, a time to call, and the word help scribbled into its loose leaf. It was nightfall when I unfurled and read it again. I was in the backyard, occupying a seat at our fire pit, my cell phone in one hand and a cigarette pinched in the other. The note said to call at 8, which was only 5 minutes away. As the time drew closer, my chest grew tighter with anxiousness. Moments ago, I'd snuck into my own room, pulled out the bottom shelf of my dresser, and unearthed the pack of Marlboros hidden there. 3 years I'd been without them, and 3 years I'd kept my promise to Mason to stop smelling like an ashtray. But tonight, shamefully, they were the only thing holding me together. When the clock on my phone pulsed 8, I took a long drag on the cigarette and dialed the number. The tone churred in and out a few times and finally connected. "Hello?" David's voice chattered on the other end. "Who is this right now?" My heart rattled in my throat. "It's Holly, Mason's mom." The voice exhaled and then returned briskly. "I need you to listen to me, okay? Are you listening?" "Yes, I'm listening." "Keep it away from your boy." The fire pit popped and spat a few embers. "Keep what away? What are you talking about?" "Listen," he snapped, a manic weight to his words. "Don't let Mason come over here anymore. It isn't safe for him. Don't even let it go over there. You have to stop this now." I twisted my neck back toward the house and then leaned forward in my chair. "Are we talking about your son right now?" "Isn't my son," he scorned. "Not at all. Not in any way." "You need to calm down. If you need help, I can call the police." "No. No police," he screamed, his voice so tight and stressed that it splintered on the other end. "It will take more from her if you do that. My wife, she can't handle much more. It's taking something from her, taking something from me. We can't get rid of it now. It's too late for us, but not for you. You can stop this." He started to weep and mutter to himself. "It came to our door to use the phone. Why did we let it in? Why did we let you use the fucking phone?" Something stirred in his background. He paused and then whispered, "Keep it away from him." And then he hung up. I'm not sure how long I sat out there, but it was long enough for the flames to shrink into powdery mounds. When I entered the house again, Mason was on the couch with his tablet. "You smell weird," he said, taking note of me. "The fire pit," I lied, my thoughts too heavy to muster anything else. He flashed me a big smile and tactfully asked, "Can I have a sleepover at Todd's this weekend?" "No," I answered stiffly. "That isn't going to work." "Why not?" he persisted. "Todd always sleeps over here. Why can't we do his?" "Because, Mason," I said no. End of story. He shot an icy look of defiance at me. "Fine, then he'll sleep over here then." "No, he won't. We're going to take a break from Todd for a while." His jaw opened, flabbergasted. "You can't do that." "I just did," I said, perhaps a little too matter-of-factly. As I walked back up the stairs, I could feel the burn of his eyes watching me on every step, both of our nights now ruined. David's deranged garble on the phone sat with me for the rest of the night. I had no idea what to do, what to fix, what to think. "Keep it away. It isn't safe for him." The message, so vague, but also desperately clear. I had to keep Mason safe. That was all that mattered. The next day, after Mason was back from school, I sat him down on the couch. "I'm sorry for last night," I said. "I was very stressed, but that is not the way I want us to speak to each other again, okay?" His eyes naturally scanned the floor. "Okay. I love you, Mason, and no matter what, I want you to be safe. So there are a few things I need to know about Todd. Will you do that for me?" He nodded again, his sneakers softly kicking the backpack slumped to the carpet. "Did he ever act weird or strange to you?" He shook his head. "What about his parents? Did he act different around them at all?" Same answer. I wasn't sure how to word the next question, but I did my best anyway. "Did he ever do something with his eyes?" This time, Mason nodded. My heart squeezed itself smaller. I wanted so much to change the subject, but to retreat to the kind cadence of sanity. But I had to know more. I had to protect my son. "What did he do with his eyes?" "A trick," Mason replied hesitantly. "Told me not to tell anyone, though." "You have to tell me." His lips crinkled, trying to keep the secret zipped up. Then he finally spoke. "He could make them disappear." I felt drugged by his words, my head even feeling lighter, like all the logic in the world had just been ruptured away. "You did see them," my thoughts repeated. "You did see the deep, dark wells." As quickly as all my self-doubt left, a scream of dread filled the empty spaces. "Did it scare you?" I asked. "A little," Mason replied absently. He said not to be, though, that he'd show me how to do it too. I grabbed his shoulder, making him jump suddenly. He didn't, though, right? He didn't do anything to you? He looked confused, like I was the one talking crazy now. No. I know that he's your friend, Mason, but I need you to promise that you won't see him anymore. Mason's gaze flicked back to mine, his eyes wide with betrayal. What? The tears began to come down. Promise me, I repeated, the words like razors scraping down my tongue. I don't want to! Mason! After much hesitation, he tearfully replied, I promise. I hugged him, closed my eyes, and surrendered to the cruelty of it all. For the rest of that hellish week, I kept my ears tuned for the knock at the door. For whatever reason, Todd never used the doorbell. Inevitably, the knock came. Behind the frosted glass of our front door, I could see Todd's vague shape teetering on his soles. When the door opened, he smiled up at me. Hi, can Mason come out and play? Sorry, dear, I smiled back. Mason can't play today. The corner of his mouth lifted as his neck cocked to the side. Can he later? No, I don't think so. Sorry. His nose wrinkled and the skin between his eyebrows creased. Okay. I closed the door, watched him leave, and that was that. It might take a few times, but eventually the message would sink in. Leave my son alone. I felt a sense of pride behind that, and what could possibly better protect a boy than his mother. But when I turned and saw Mason's cold eyes from the stairs, the pride all but evaporated. When Todd returned the next day, I gave him the same answer. Then the day after that, and the one after that. I couldn't even refuse to answer when he knocked. Otherwise, he'd sit there and wait, knock again, and wait some more, knowing full well we were home. 4 straight evenings of it. And poor Mason, he had every right to despise me for this. No parent could want to wall themselves between their son and his best friend, his first friend. But what choice did I have? We were drifting apart, orbiting ever further away from one another. He was my prisoner, and I was the judge sentencing him back to a lonely world. Surely he'd make new friends, right? The world was full of them, and if anything, this was proof that he could find them. That thought helped me cope, anyway. When the knock came for the 5th time in a row, my tolerance had run out. Todd wasn't catching on, and to make matters more irritating, it was 8 or so at night this time. Part of me hoped it was someone else, maybe a neighbor bringing a package by that was wrongfully left on their doorstep, but I knew better than that, and I was not allowing this to go any further. Mason was doing his homework at the kitchen table when I passed by him. No acknowledgement whatsoever. When I pulled the door open, Todd was standing beneath our porch light, both shoulders hunched over his ears as though expecting me to smack him, and perhaps verbally that was what I did. Go home, I said assertively. We're done. No more of this, all right? Can Mason come out to play? He asked sorrowfully, as though it weren't after dark. No, Todd, he can't. And he won't the next day or the next. Now go home and stay there. His small arm rubbed his sleeve nervously. It's really dark. I don't want to walk home alone. Can I use your phone to call my parents? I felt absolutely cruel, but I also knew the game he was trying to play. You walked here on your own. You can walk back on your own. Then, as I moved to close the door and end the conversation, Todd made his eyes disappear. The darkness washed over them quickly and seemed actually to curdle in his sockets, a thickening, horrible texture. His face became milk wax, the sad child disappearing behind it. Beads of perhaps sweat dripped from his temples. One ran into his eye and vanished into the void. I want to come inside, he spoke, the sorrowful note in his voice also gone. My heart slackened to a deep, slow throb. I felt the need to pinch my side to tweak it hard enough to draw blood and wake from this moment. Between the dead, shriveled lips, I could see the decayed tips of black teeth. Can I come inside? He asked. No, I said semi-reactively. His black, craving eyes narrowed at me. For a moment, I actually thought they started to cry, but it was the darkness dribbling down his cheeks, oozing like oil slicks. I just want to play with Mason. The sound of it, the sound of that horrible face saying my son's name, snapped me out of the shock. I slammed the door closed and quickly locked it. Mason stood stiffly in the kitchen. His expression was only a shimmer of consciousness, vacant as a sleepwalker. Mason, look at me, honey. It's all okay. Everything's going to be okay. But his unfocused eyes were not facing me. 3 firm knocks came from the door. When I turned to face it, a dark shape lingered behind the frosted glass. A tall figure, taller than any adult, was hunching to look inside. And from behind the single pane that separated us, its vague shape didn't move. From the other side, Todd's childish voice was still calling. "Can I please come inside? Don't you want to play, Mason? Don't you want to play?" I could feel it watching us like static vibrating the air. When I tried to move Mason, he refused to budge, staring emptily toward the evil thing behind the glass. Heavy as he was, I scooped him up in my arms and bolted for the stairs. It won't break in, my thoughts uttered. It isn't allowed to. That much I was sure of. If it wanted to get in, it would have by now. It needed to be invited. I shut both of us away in the bathroom upstairs, and when the sounds of the front door finally ceased, Mason snapped out of it. He was confused, like he just missed everything that transpired. I wasn't sure whether to consider that a blessing or not. Perhaps it was, and perhaps also it was not God that answered my prayer. It was impossible to digest what happened that night. Sometimes I'd linger on the stairs, right on the top step, and watch the doorway, wondering if the glass would suddenly darken, if Todd's voice would slip through and ask to come inside. One night, David had left a voicemail on my phone. "She's gone," his voice whimpered. "It got what it wanted from her, drained her dry. Now my wife won't wake up, and it's left us. I don't know what it wants from your boy, but it wants something. No matter what, don't let it back inside." The message cut out after that, and he still won't answer my calls. Todd never did come back, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Strangely enough, the one least affected by all of this was Mason. I was worried to see him fall back into that distant bubble, but that isn't what happened. He started to make friends with other kids around the neighborhood. New friends, normal friends. He'd become a real social butterfly, and despite my brain ripping itself apart to understand what I had seen, I at least had that comfort to cling to. Seeing Mason happy made me happy. Lately, though, I've been feeling strange. It's been harder to feel motivated about things, let alone get out of bed in the morning. Even my appetite started to dwindle. Day by day, I've been growing increasingly sapped and lethargic. I don't know what's wrong, but it's getting worse. Mason's helping me get around the house, even going out of his way to play chef and make things to eat. He's a good boy, but sometimes, dear Lord, I catch something in his eyes. Something that shouldn't be there. But it's only a trick of the light. Please, God, let it only be a trick of the light. Ooh. Black-eyed children, people. Black-eyed children. That's actually an interesting way to that's an interesting way for the Black-eyed children story to be told, honestly. Alright. We'll play something here. I hope everyone's getting around okay in the Discord. So many welcome landings. Ugh. Black-eyed children are terrifying in general. Hey, Fifi. Oh, that's true, Mark. Yeah. It's okay, Queenie. It's been a long time coming with the whole Discord thing. The only reason I'm even somewhat familiar with it is because freaking... oh, man. Because of flipping... I'm in so many Discord servers for, like, gaming and shit. Thanks, Hopeful Generation. Wendigo stories are wild by themselves. We don't need to mix other things into that. That's my own personal opinion, though. There's so many different versions of Black-eyed children. It's hard to keep up sometimes. Alright. Stream health is good. Nothing hiccuping. Alrighty. Well, that was a good one. I might actually have to read that later and read it properly. There's so many things I'm discovering doing it this way. I like it. We'll do a classic one here. Let's do Tiki Toby. See what this is all about. Are you talking about, like, there should be a membership section on the actual page. Hey, Ghost TV. Aw, thanks for coming by. Psychosis was really good. I actually got permission from Matt a long time ago to read that story, so I think that's something I'm gonna work on as an actual project. But yeah, Psychosis is fucking wild, dude. I'm probably gonna be live for another hour, and then I'm going to call it a night because I need to rest my voice. But yeah, I'll probably be live for another hour. I'm gonna get 2 more stories out. We'll read a classic, and then I'll read The Girl the Universe Forgot. Just for you, Queenie. Plus, that one's also a long read, too. It's like 30 minutes. So it'll be a nice one to kind of wrap the night up, in my opinion. But yeah, we'll do a classic one. And we'll do The Girl the Universe Forgot. The classic I want to read is Tiki Toby. So we'll go from there. I hope you guys are excited because I'm excited. But let's see here. Oh, I love Colorful Cat so much. Their music's so good. Anyway, we're going to pause this. Get back into the ambiance. The long road home seemed to go on and on. The road continued to stretch in front of the vehicle endlessly. The light that shone through the branches of the tall green trees danced across the window in random patterns, and every once in a while, obnoxiously shining in your eyes. The surroundings were full of deep green trees, forming a forest around the road. The only sound was the sound of the car's engine as it traveled down the path. It was peaceful and left a serene feeling. Although the ride seemed like a nice one, it lacked every form of nice from its two passengers. The middle-aged woman behind the steering wheel had neat, short brown hair that fit her complexion quite well. She wore a green V-neck t-shirt and a pair of blue jeans. Diamond stud earrings decorated each of her ears, which partially showed from behind her haircut. She had deep green eyes, which her shirt brought out, and the lighting seemed to make them more noticeable. There wasn't anything significant about her appearance. She looked like any other average mother you would see on TV shows and the like. However, the one thing that made her different than the average mothers was the dark bag she had under her eyes. Her facial expression was gloomy and sad, although she genuinely looked like someone who smiled a lot. She would sniffle every once in a while and occasionally glance in the rearview mirror to look at her son in the back seat, who was hunched over partially with his arms held tight around his chest and his head pressed against the cold window. The boy lacked any normal appearance, and anyone could plainly see there was something wrong with him. His messy brown hair went every which way, and the luminescent lighting brought out his pale, almost gray skin. His eyes were dark, unlike his mother's, and he wore a white t-shirt and scrub pants that had been provided for him by the hospital. The clothes he had worn before were so shredded and bloodstained that they weren't wearable anymore. The right side of his face bared a few cuts along with a split brow. His right arm was bandaged all the way to the shoulder, which had been shredded when his right side hit the shattered glass. His injuries appeared to be painful when in reality he couldn't feel anything. This was just one of the glories of being him. One of the challenges he had to face while growing up was growing up with a rare disease that caused him to be completely numb towards pain. Never before had he felt himself get hurt. He could have lost an arm and felt nothing. The other major disorder he had faced, which was the one that deemed him many insulting nicknames in the short time he attended grade school before he switched to homeschooling, was his Tourette Syndrome, which caused him to tick and twitch in ways he couldn't control. He would crack his neck uncontrollably and twitch every once in a while. The kids would tease him and call him Ticky Toby, and they mocked him with exaggerated twitching and laughing. It got so bad he had to turn to homeschooling. It was too hard for him to be in a common learning environment with seemingly every kid poking, or more like stabbing, fun at him. Toby stared blankly out the window, his face empty of any emotion, and every few minutes his shoulder, arm, or foot would twitch. Every bump that the tire hit would make his stomach turn. Toby Rogers was the boy's name, and the last time Toby remembered riding in a car was when it crashed. That's all he thought about, unconsciously replaying everything he remembered before he blacked out, over and over again. Toby had been the lucky one. His sister had not been so lucky. When the thought of his sister came, he couldn't help the tears that welled up in his eyes. The horrible memories replayed in his mind. Her screaming that had cut off when the front of the car was smashed in. It all went blank for a moment before Toby opened his eyes to see his sister's body, her forehead pierced with glass shards, her hips and legs crushed under the force of the steering wheel, and her torso pushed in from the too late inflated airbag. That was the last thing he had seen of his dear older sister. The road home continued on for what seemed like forever. It took so long to get home because his mom wanted to avoid the sight of the crash. When the surroundings gave way to a familiar neighborhood, they were both more than ready to get out of the car and step back into their home. It was an older neighborhood with quaint little houses all next to each other. The car drove in front of a blue house with white window panes. They both quickly noticed the old vehicle that was parked in front of the house and the familiar figure that stood in the driveway. Toby felt automatic anger and frustration take over him at the sight of his father who wasn't there. His mother pulled the car up in the driveway beside him before turning off the engine and preparing to step out and face her husband. "Why is he here?" Toby said quietly as he looked back at his mother, who reached to open the car door. "He's your father, Toby. He's here because he wants to see you." His mother responded in a monotone voice, trying to sound less shaky. "Yet couldn't drive up to the hospital to see Lyra before she died?" Toby narrowed his eyes out the window. "He was drunk that night, honey. He couldn't drive." "Yeah, when is he not?" Toby pushed the door open before his mother and stumbled out onto the driveway, where he met his father's gaze before looking down at his feet with a stern expression. His mother stepped out behind him and met her husband's eyes before walking around the car. His father opened up his arms, expecting a hug from his wife, but she walked past him and put her arm around Toby's shoulder and started leading him inside. "Connie," her husband began in a raspy voice. "What, no welcome home hug, huh?" She ignored her husband's obnoxious words and walked past him with her son under her arm. "Hey, he's 16. He can walk by himself." His father began to follow them in. "He's 17, Connie glared back at him before opening the door to the house and stepping inside. Toby, why don't we get you in your room to rest, okay? I'll come get you when dinner is ready. No, I'm 16. I can walk by myself, Toby said sarcastically, and glared back at his father before stumbling up the small staircase and turning into his room, where he slammed the door violently. His little room didn't have much in it, just a small bed, a dresser, and a window, and his walls had a few picture frames of his family, back when they were a family, before his father became an alcoholic and acted violently toward the rest of his family. Toby remembered when he was arguing with his mom, and he grabbed her by the hair and shoved her to the floor, and when Lyra had tried to break it up, he pushed her, and she hit her back on the corner of the kitchen counter. Toby could never forgive him for what he did to his mother and his sister. Never. Toby didn't care how much his father beat him down. He couldn't feel it anyway. What he did care about was how he intentionally hurt the only two people he cared about. And when he was waiting in the hospital where his sister took her last breaths, the only one who didn't rush there was his dad. Toby stood by the window and looked out at the street. He could have sworn he saw something out of the corner of his eye, but quickly blamed it on the meds he was on. When dinner time had come and his mother called up to him, Toby came down the stairs and hesitantly sat down at the table across from his father, and in between his mother and an empty chair. It was quiet as his parents picked at their food, but Toby refused to eat. Instead, he just watched his dad with a blank stare. His mother caught on to his staring and elbowed him slightly. Toby looked over at her slightly, and then down at his uneaten food, which he still didn't touch. Toby laid in bed. He pulled his covers over his head, stared at the window. He was tired, but there was no way he could fall asleep. He couldn't. There was too much to think about. He had been debating on whether or not to follow his mother's directions and forgive his father, or continue holding a grudge with his boiling hatred. He heard his door creak open, and his mother padded into the room and sat on the bed next to him. She reached over and rubbed his back, which had been turned to her. I know it's hard, Toby. Trust me, I understand. But I promise you it will get better, she said softly. When is he going to leave? Toby said with an innocent tone in his shaky voice. Connie let her gaze fall down to her feet. I don't know, honey. He's staying as far as I know. Toby didn't respond. He just continued to look forward at the wall, holding his damaged arm near his chest. After a few minutes of silence, his mother sighed before she leaned in to kiss his cheek and stood up to walk out of the room. Good night, she said as she closed the door. The hours passed slowly, and Toby couldn't quit tossing and turning. Every time he let his imagination take over, he heard the screeching of tires, the screaming of his sister, and he would uncontrollably jerk in bed. He threw off his cover and, lying on his back, he pulled his pillow over his face and cried into it. He could hear his own pitiful weeping. He would have been screaming and crying if he didn't press his pillow over his face. After a few seconds, he threw the pillow off his face and sat up, hunched over, holding his head and breathing roughly, tears streaming from his eyes. He couldn't help but cry. He tried to keep it in, but he couldn't stop the whining and whimpering as he sat there shaking. He inhaled before he stood up and walked around his bed to the window and peered out, taking deep breaths, trying to calm down. He rubbed his eyes and looked out at the group of tall pine trees across the street. He stopped suddenly, and his gaze slowly centered on something standing under the streetlight. He heard ringing in his ears and couldn't look away. The figure stood beside the streetlight, about 2 feet shorter than it did. Long arms draped at its side as it stared up at him with non-existing eyes. The figure had no facial features to speak of. No eyes, no mouth, no nose, yet it held Toby's hypnotized stare, seemingly peering into his very being. The ringing in his ears grew louder and louder each second he stared before suddenly it all went black. The next morning, Toby woke in his bed. He felt different. He wasn't tired at all, and when he consciously woke up, it felt like he had been lying there awake for hours. He had no thoughts flowing through his mind. He sat up slowly and stumbled over to the wall, but when he stood, he automatically felt dizzy. He stumbled to the doorway and walked down the stairs. His parents were sitting at the table. His father tuned into the small TV that sat on the countertop, and his mother was reading the newspaper. She quickly looked over when she saw Toby's presence looming behind her. "Well, good morning, sleepyhead. You've been sleeping forever," she greeted him with a hesitant smile. Toby slowly looked over at the clock and noticed that it was 12:30 p.m. "I made you breakfast, but it got cold. I was going to wake you, but I felt you needed sleep." Her expression fell from happy to worried as her son resisted responding to her. "Are you all right?" Toby stumbled over and sat by his father. He felt as if he was on idle and had no control over his actions. He was seeing everything he did, but it didn't register in his brain properly. He reached out to his father's arm, but his hand ended up getting slapped. His father turned to him abruptly and pushed his chair over with his foot. "Don't touch me, boy," he yelled. His mother stood up. "All right, knock that off. That is the last thing we need." The days went by and things continued on as they were. Connie spent most of her time cleaning the house, and her rude husband spent most of his time ordering her around. It was just like how it used to be before the crash. Toby never really left his room. He would sit by his bed and tremble. His mind would wander, but his thoughts changed too fast to be remembered. He would pace around his small room like a caged animal or stare out the window. The unhealthy cycle continued. Connie continued to be pushed around by her husband, being way too submissive to him, and Toby remained in his room. Before he could think twice, he would begin to chew on his hands, tearing the flesh from his fingers. He would gnaw his hands until they bled. When his mother walked in on him while he was doing so, she reacted horribly. She rushed him downstairs and grabbed the first aid kit, wrapping his hands in bandages. Afterwards, she demanded that he wouldn't leave her side again. Toby isolated himself so much that he grew to hate being around others. His memory grew glitchy as well. He'd start missing memory of minutes, hours, days, and so on. He'd begin talking nonsense about things completely unrelated to the conversations he would have. He'd go off about seeing things, sharks in the sink as he washed the dishes, hearing crickets in his pillows, and seeing ghosts outside his bedroom window. His mother grew so anxious about his mental health that she decided it would be good for him to talk to a professional about what he was feeling. Connie walked Toby into the building, holding his hand and guiding him in. She walked him up to the front desk and began talking to the lady who sat behind it. "Mrs. Rogers?" the lady asked. "Yes, that's me," Connie nodded. "We're here to see Dr. Oliver. I'm here with Toby Rogers." "Yes, right this way." The lady stood and led him down a long hallway. Toby looked at the framed artwork down the halls and tuned in to the sound of the lady's high heels on the hardwood floor. She opened the door to a room with a table and 2 chairs. "If we can get him to sit in here for a few minutes, I'll get the doctor." She smiled and held the door open. Toby stumbled into the room and sat down at the table. He looked over at his mother and the lady before the door slowly shut behind them. He looked around the room before he held up his tightly bandaged hands and began to bite at the bandages to unwrap his hands. But he was interrupted as the door swung open and a young woman in a black and spotted dress with light blonde hair stepped in, holding a clipboard and a pen. "Toby?" she asked with a smile. Toby looked up at her and nodded. "Nice to meet you, Toby. My name is Dr. Oliver." She put her hand out for him to shake by hesitantly, but hesitantly pulled away when she noticed his bandaged hands. Oh, she smiled nervously before clearing her throat and sitting in the chair across the table from him. So, I'm going to ask you a few questions. Try to answer them as honestly as possible, okay? She placed her clipboard down on the table. Toby nodded slowly and held his restrained hands in his lap. How old are you, Toby? 17, he responded quietly. She wrote that down on the paper that was clipped to the clipboard. What is your full name? Toby Aaron Rogers. When is your birthday? April 28th. Who is your immediate family? Toby paused for a minute before answering her question. My mom, my dad, and... He stopped. My sister. I heard about your sister, dear. I'm really sorry. Her expression faded into a sad, pity-filled look. Toby nodded. Do you remember anything from the crash, Toby? Toby looked away from her. His mind went blank for a moment. He looked down at his lap, and in the surrounding area, he heard a faint ringing sound. His eyes widened, and he froze in place. Toby? The counselor asked. Toby, are you listening? Toby felt a shiver go down his spine until he froze once again and slowly looked over out the little window through the door where he saw it. A dark, featureless figure peering in at him. He stared, eyes widened, the ringing growing louder and louder until suddenly the loud voice of the counselor broke his trance. Toby! She yelled. Toby jumped and fell sideways out of his chair and backed up into the corner. Dr. Oliver stood up, holding her clipboard to her chest, a surprised look in her eyes. Toby met her eyes again, his breath hitching as he twitched. That night, Toby lay in bed. His eyes were dazed as he stared straight up at his ceiling. He could feel himself begin to doze off when he heard the scattering of footsteps down his hallway. He sat up and looked towards the doorway, his door wide open. There was no light. Everything was lit by the luminescent blue glow of the moon through his window, leaving a cold lighting. He stood up and slowly made his way toward the doorway when suddenly the door, which previously was wide open, slammed in his face. He gasped and fell back. He was out of breath when he hit the ground and he began breathing heavily, his eyes wide open. He waited for a few seconds before getting back on his feet. He reached out and grasped the cold handle with his bandaged hand, and it creaked open. He looked out into the dark hallway and tiptoed out of his room. The window at the end of the hallway lit up the darkness with blue moonlight as he padded his way down. He could hear footsteps rustling behind him, and faint giggling followed by the pitter-patter of small feet, which sounded like a child had run in front of him, giggling and running around. The hallway was a lot longer than he remembered. It seemed endless, like the ride home from the hospital. He heard the door creak in front of him. Mom? He called in a shaky voice. Suddenly, a door slammed behind him, and he jumped and turned around. There, he heard a long, eerie groan that sounded like a croak right in his ear. He turned around as fast as he could and was suddenly face to face with none other than his dead sister. Her eyes were clouded white, her skin pale, the right side of her jaw dangling there by tissue and muscle, glass protruding from her forehead. Black blood leaking down her face, her blonde hair pulled up in a ponytail as it always was, and she was wearing her gray t-shirt and athlete shorts, which were dirty and spotted with blood. Her legs were bent in ways they shouldn't be. She stood, emitting a long, croaking noise only an inch away from Toby's face. Toby yelped and fell back. Ah! He started to crawl, backwards, away from her, but he was unable to break the eye contact he held with her. Blank, dead eyes. He dragged himself backward until he backed up into something. He stopped for a second. Everything was dead silent except for his heavy breathing and crying. He slowly looked up to meet the blank face of a tall, dark figure, the same figure that stood over him now. Behind the tall, dark mask were rows of children looking to range from 3 to 10 years old. their eyes completely black and dark black blood leaking from their eye sockets. He screamed and stood up as fast as he could, only to be tripped by dark black tendrils that wrapped around his ankle. He fell straight on his stomach and got the wind knocked out of him. He tried to scream, but he couldn't make a sound. He wheezed out before it all went black. Toby woke with a start. He screamed out and sat up as fast as he could, completely short of breath. He held his chest with his bandaged hands. It was just a dream. Just a dream. He lay back down on his bed and rolled over on his side. It felt like against weight had been lifted off his chest as he took in deep breaths. He stood up and padded over to his window. He saw nothing. Nobody was out there. No ghosts, no figures, no nothing. He heard the rustling and coughing of his father outside the doorway. His door was closed. He walked over and opened it. Looking out into the hallway once again, he padded down the hallway and into the kitchen, where he found his dad standing and having a smoke in their living room. Toby waited for a second and watched him from around the corner before a burning feeling started deep in his chest. Deep, boiling anger overtook him. He heard the little imaginary voices in his head. "Do it, do it, do it," they chanted. He turned away and held his arms. He felt like he actually had control over himself, unlike he did for the past few weeks since he got home from the hospital. He actually had complete thoughts for just moments before the chanting of the little voices in his head clouded them. Kill him. He wasn't there. He wasn't there. Kill him. Kill him. They continued on. Toby trembled. No, he wasn't going to do it. What, was he going crazy? No, he won't kill anyone. He can't. He hated his father, but there was no way he was going to kill him. That was it. The last thought he had before he fell into an idle state once again. The influence of the voices in his head was too much. He began to silently walk up behind his father. He reached over the counter to the knife in the case. He gripped it in his hand. He felt the sensation take over his chest. He let out a snicker. He began laughing so hard he had to gasp for breath. His father turned around abruptly before he felt a brute force shove him to the floor. He grunted as the air was knocked out of him. "What?" He looked up at the boy who stood over him, grasping the kitchen knife in his hand. "Toby, what are you doing?" He went to sit up and put his arms out in front of him in self-defense, but before he knew it, Toby was on top of him. He went to grab his neck, but his father reached out and blocked his hand by grabbing onto his wrist. "Stop! Get off me, you little fucker!" he yelled, and with his other hand, he threw an off-center punch towards Toby's shoulder, but he didn't stop. The look in Toby's eyes was not the same. It looked as if a demon had taken control of him. He yelled back and went to stab the knife into his father's chest, but his father blocked him and grabbed onto his wrist once again. He went and shoved him back, but Toby kicked his father out in front of him and landed a hard blow straight into his father's chest. His father recoiled and pulled his arms away to cuff his face, but Toby got back up and drove the knife straight into his shoulder. His father let out a loud cry and went to pull the knife out, but before he could, Toby threw his fist straight into his face. He began to pound his fists into his head, laughing and wheezing. He cracked his neck and grabbed the knife and ripped it out of his father's shoulder. He drove it deep into his dad's chest and repeatedly stabbed into his torso, blood spilling out and getting splattered everywhere. He didn't stop until his father's body went still. He threw the knife over to the side and leaned over his body, coughing and panting. He stared at his father's smashed-in face and sat there twitching until a loud scream broke the silence. He looked over to see his mother standing a few feet away, covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Toby!" she screamed. "Why did you do that? Why?" Toby stood up and began to back away from his father's bloody corpse. He began to back out of the kitchen. He looked down at the blood-soaked bandages on his hands and looked up at his mother one last time before he turned and ran out of the house. He ran into the garage and slammed his hand against the control panel on the wall, pushed the button to open the garage door. Before he ran out, he noticed his father's hatchets, which had been hanging on the tool rack above a table full of jars filled to the brim with old rusted nails and screws. One of the hatchets was new. It had a bright orange handle and a shiny blade, and the other was old, with a wooden handle and an old dull blade. He grabbed both and looked down at the table, and he saw a box of matches, and under the table was a red gasoline tank. He held both of the hatchets in one hand, grabbed the matches and gasoline before running out of the garage, down the driveway and up the street. As he approached the streetlight that he could see out of his own bedroom window, he heard police sirens in the distance. He turned around and the red and blue flashing lights came rushing down the street. Toby stood for a second before he pulled open the cap on the gasoline tank and ran down the street, spilling gasoline all over the street after him. He turned and ran into the trees. He poured the last bit of gasoline out before he reached into his pocket and pulled out a match. He struck it against the box and immediately dropped it. In an instant, flames burst around him. The fire caught on the trees and bushes around him, and before he knew it, he was surrounded by fire. The silhouettes of police cars were visible through the flames, and he backed away into the forest around him. He looked around, but his vision was blurred, his heart was pounding, and he closed his eyes for a moment. This was it. This was the end. Toby felt a hand on his shoulder. He opened his eyes and looked over to see a large white hand with long, bony fingers resting on his shoulder. He followed the arm that was attached to the hand up to a dark, towering figure. It appeared to be wearing a dark black suit, and its face was completely blank. It towered over Toby's small frame as it looked down on him. Tendrils reached out from his back. Before Toby knew it, his vision blurred, and he heard the sound of ringing in his ears. Everything went blank. That was it. That was the end. That was how Toby Rogers died. A few weeks later, Connie sat in her sister's kitchen. His sister Lori sat next to her drinking a cup of coffee. About 3 weeks ago, Connie lost her husband and her son. And a few weeks before, she'd lost her daughter to a car crash. Since then, she moved in with her sister. The police were keeping her busy. They had just finished cleaning up the case, and the story had been released 2 weeks ago. The focus of the world seemed to have shifted to completely new stories. Lori switched the TV onto a news broadcast. On the TV, the news reporter began introducing the new headline. We have breaking news. Last night, there have been reports the murder of 4 individuals. There are no suspects yet, but the victims were a group of middle school kids who had been out in the woods late last night. The kids had been bludgeoned and stabbed to death. The investigations have discovered a weapon at the crime scene. It appears to be an old, dull blade hatchet, as you can see here. The picture changed to show snapshots of the weapon exactly as it was left at the crime scene. Investigators have pulled the name of a possible suspect, Toby Rogers, a 17-year-old boy who stabbed his father to death a few weeks ago and tried to cover up his escape by setting a fire in the streets and forest around the neighborhood. Although they believe the young boy had died in the fire, investigators suspect Rogers might still be alive, due to the fact that his body was never found. Oh man, I forgot how weird that got at the end. Also, what the hell? maybe my memory's just terrible, but I don't remember Slender Man making a cameo in Tiki Toby. Is that how that shit started? Is that how Slender Man started in Tiki Toby? I'm so confused. I have mixed feelings. I don't know. Oh man, glad I have water. Mostly because holy crap, guys, a lot of reading back to back. Maybe. That's just wild to me because I really didn't remember Slender Man showing up or having a cameo. Or maybe they were just like building across like all of it as it went. So, I don't know. I mean, I don't hate it. I just thought it was different. Let's see here. Thanks for being a member, Logan. Got a new member of the family. Good stuff, good stuff. But yeah, I didn't really remember like him having cameos like that. I'll have to go back and fucking read some shit. Yeah, that was a horrible story. All right, got one more story, and then we're gonna call it a night because I need to rest my voice, especially since I have work tomorrow. I mean, Corpse and I don't really talk anymore, so it's really hard to consider us friends when we don't really speak to each other. So, I don't know. I hope he's doing well. That's all I can say. Yep. Got one more to wrap the night up. Oh. I'm dying. All right. We will wrap it up with The Girl the Universe Forgot. There should be a button next to the notification bell on the video description page, like right there at the top. Thanks, Mr. Haunted. Welcome to the stream. All right, I gotta get some good music here. Whew. Let's see. Nah, I don't really want that one. There's something in here that I have that's pretty good. The Mandela Effect. That phrase never meant anything to me. Spooky, I guess, but it wasn't something I thought about for more than 5 minutes. I mean, honestly, until college, I didn't even know what it was. I'm not one for conspiracy theories or ghost stories or anything like that, so what would you expect? I wish I was still so ignorant. It all began in my life science class. I was 20 at the time, and it was pretty close to the end of the fall semester at FSU. My professor, Dr. Arnaud, had given us our finals early because she had a heart and didn't want us to be studying for everything at once. She figured doing our finals before everybody else's gave us time to study hers without any distraction, and then gave us time to study everybody else's with a little less stress. I loved her for that. But part of me wishes she had never had decided to bless us that way. On the last day of classes, most people skipped. Everybody knew we weren't really doing anything, and everybody just wanted to be done for the semester. Still, some of us were bound by the attendance policies on our scholarships, and others, just out of courtesy to Dr. Arnaud, showed up. I personally was present because I loved her class. 1 more hour and 15 minutes of her teaching was a win for me, and hell, I had nothing better to do. She began the class slightly different than she usually did. We'd often start out with a current event from earlier in the week, something about GMOs, the dramatically declining population of giraffes, or something else relating to life science. But today, we looked at an older article, and something far from relative to biology. It was about the Mandela Effect. I never heard of it before. Most of us hadn't. But she was passionate about it. The old lady was usually pretty sprightly while teaching, choleric when somebody disagreed with her, but man, today she was ecstatic. All right, to those of you considerate enough to show up to my class today, I have a treat for you. I'm going to teach you all about something that you'll probably never forget. Or maybe you'll blow it off, I don't know. But if this intrigues you like it did me, I'm sure you'll be happy you arrived. Can somebody tell me when Nelson Mandela died? Everyone looked around confusedly. Then a girl raised her hand. He died a couple years ago, 2012, I think. She slowly nodded, studying the class like she was waiting for something. And she found that something. Seagrave? She pointed at a boy in the class. Why the confused face? Well, I thought he died like a while ago, the 90s or something, in prison. She beamed with delight. Well, class, is Amanda right or Cole? Everyone seemed conflicted. Most of us were like me and honestly had no clue, but a couple of people agreed with Cole and one other person agreed with Amanda. Amanda, Dr. Arnaud commented, you're closer to correct. He died from a respiratory tract infection on December 5th, 2013. But why did some of you think he died in prison in the early 90s? Several of you thought that. Badar, she motioned at one of the guys to explain, where'd you come to that conclusion? I could swear we learned that in 7th grade in my world history class. It was part of Black History Month. Yeah, same, one of the girls nodded. Black History Month when I was a kid. He died, and then there was this thing about his wife trying to sue some company. Exemplary. Dr. Arnaud was more complacent than I'd ever seen her. You remember all this being said, except, strangely enough, it never was. None of this was ever said. Look it up. Go to Google and search Nelson Mandela death. You'll find nothing about the 90s or prison. For that matter, type in Nelson Mandela prison death. You won't find a CNN article or a documentary about his funeral, which was televised all over the globe. You won't find his purported cause of death, and you'll find nothing about the riots in South African cities afterward, because none of it happened. This left me a little weirded out. Most of the class was silent now and waiting for her to make sense of it. It's a phenomenon known as the Mandela Effect, she grinned. A complete mystery. An enigmatic anomaly on Earth with no scientific explanation. And from that point, the hour and 15 minutes flew by. I thought 5 minutes had elapsed when it was time to be dismissed. It left me absolutely mind-boggled. Basically, it's this theory that Nelson Mandela did die in prison in the 90s, but then something happened that somehow reversed this event, and he went on to live decades longer before dying again in 2013. Though some of us don't remember Mandela dying in the 20th century, others do. They remember the news coverage, the papers, the heartfelt speech from his widow, but all of it vanished from the universe when this event took place and rewrote history. And all that's left is this huge collective memory. These people that know he died like this and all remember that same thing somehow, but it's wrong. Personally, I don't remember being told Mandela died in the 90s, but a lot of people did and do. There are two theories behind it. The first and less common is time travel. They say that someone went back in time and altered an event just slightly, but it created a ripple effect that resulted in something changing dramatically. Here's a made-up example. Bob married Sally. Bob and Sally met downtown sometime back in August of 2005. Bob's dog just got ran over and he was grieving, and when he saw Sally walking her dog, he couldn't help but walk over and talk to her. Before long, they were in love and married. Well then, Jake goes back in time to the same town around the same time. Jake's driving on the road about the same time Bob's dog got run over, but since Jake's driving and he's in front of the car that hit Bob's dog, and since Jake is a better driver, he comes to a halt and never hits it. The dog runs back over to Bob completely fine. So now when Bob goes downtown, he doesn't think twice when he sees Sally walking her dog, and they never say a word to each other. They each get married to somebody else, and now their son, who could have cured cancer or something, never exists. But time travel is believed to be entirely fictional and improbable. The more common theory is that there are several universes, all alternate, and that sometimes they rub shoulders or essentially cross paths, like two cars in a really minor accident, a fender bender. Universe A rear ends Universe B, and almost everything is the same except Universe A needs a new bumper. Well, in literal terms, now something between Universe A and Universe B is swapped. Nelson Mandela lived in 2013 and died of a respiratory tract infection, and not in prison in the 90s, and now everybody in Universe B thought he died from a lung infection instead of an African jail. This one's the commonly believed one. After Dr. Arnaud's class, I looked into it more, and there are other examples too. Take the Berenstain Bears, for example. We all read those books as kids, or at least our parents read them to us. Well, without looking, how was their name spelled? Berenstain or Berenstain? Which one? If you said Berenstain, you're one of thousands of others that would bet their house you're right. But you're wrong. It was never spelled that way. And what about Curious George? Did he have a tail? What position is the thinker making? Is his fist pressed against his head? Or is his hand not even balled up, slumped into his cheek, his fingers extended all the way to his chest? Curious George does not have a tail, and the thinker is doing the latter position. These things may seem silly, but if they're wrong, why do so many people believe them to be true? Personally, I have my own theory about the Berenstain Bears and Curious George. When you read the name Berenstain, it looks Jewish or German, and like many Jewish or German surnames, you think of it as ending in Stein instead of Stain. Take, for instance, Goldstein, Pearlstein, hell, Einstein. We all know that name. Berenstain just doesn't look right, and over time, our minds filled in the A with an E. Same with Curious George. He's a monkey, for God's sake. Of course we think he had a tail. He's even commonly portrayed hanging from a vine with his head down and his butt up in the air as if he's hanging from his tail. These are more like the power of suggestion. Through external factors, our memories of these simple things were altered. But then you have the thinker, King Tut's burial mask, and Nelson Mandela, of course. If the thinker really is posing with his hand in a relaxed, non-curled, flat motion pressed against his cheek, which is folded over his knuckles, why do we remember his hand completely balled up and resting against his head? And not just us, but popular cartoons depict it in this way as well. Why do so many people make this mistake? And King Tut's burial mask, what is on the top of the mask, right between his eyes? There's a figure depicted there, an animal, to be more specific. For those of you that thought snake, duh, you're like me, but you're wrong, at least partly. There's a snake and a bird that looks so outlandish and unnatural on that mask that I can't even look at it without shaking my head. There couldn't have been two animals. That looks ridiculous. Look it up on Google and see for yourself. I remember in 6th grade, I had a world history textbook with the burial mask on the cover. I looked at that thing every damn day. Hell, when I was nodding in class, that's where my eyes fell, down onto the cover of that book, which was sitting on my desk. I never saw that bird. I thought that maybe it could have just been the angle, but the bird sticks out so far that there's no way you can't see it, unless the mask was turned completely away from you, which it never is. And if it was, you wouldn't be able to see the snake either. I'm not the only one that remembers it looking like this. Popular cartoons draw it wrong all the time, too. But there was always a bird on that thing, since 1323 BC. Well, enough of my rambling. You might be wondering what all this has to do with me. See, after Dr. Arnaud's class that day, I couldn't get this off my mind. I was so spooked out by it, so morbidly intrigued, that it just occupied my thoughts. I felt like a victim of it. But still, it wasn't some grand epiphany of mine, some life-changing philosophy. After all, I was too busy studying for exams to ponder it that often. But all that changed when I sat down with my friend Asher a week later for breakfast. Asher and I had been friends since 1st grade. We met at Tawa City Christian Academy in Michigan, in a town with a population of less than 10,000. It was always freezing there, dreary and gray and silent. You could see the whole town from a 5-story building. There were miles and miles of abandoned cornfields, and the only real moneymaker in the town was a small harbor at which fishing occurred. I discovered later on that apparently in the other countries, Tawa City, Michigan, is known as the bird-watching capital of the world. Purportedly, a vast array of bird species migrate there, and it's great for bird watching. I never noticed that. All I can remember is the snowy gray skies, the silent cornfields, and the feeling that if the place was wiped off the face of the earth, no one would notice. Naturally, the public school was puny, but the private school, it hardly existed. In my class, there were 15 of us, 16 including the teacher. So I thought. I'm starving, man, Asher sighed, walking ahead of me into the diner. It was early on a Saturday morning. It was the last week of the semester, and we'd been studying like crazy. We figured our day would be spent doing the same thing as usual, an amalgamation of studying endlessly and resisting the urge to buy Adderall, which was pretty prominent on the campus around that time. But my day didn't consist of that at all. We sat down at our usual booth. Asher's hair is red and messy as usual. He was a ginger, and a mischievous one at that. He was a prankster and barely passed his classes. He was here for the booze and the girls, and his grades reflected it, but as best friends do, I forced him to study and pass. Still, breakfast was a school-free zone. All mention of classes and tests was off limit at the diner. Here we wanted to rid our minds of it all. The last time we met up, I went on and on and on about the Mandela Effect to the point he wanted to shove scissors in his ears, so I tried not to mention it today. I'm telling you, man, he sipped his coffee. When this is over, we're partying like crazy. Like crazy, Sean. I don't want to remember where I am when I wake up that morning. I chuckled. Yeah, man, for sure. Don't you sometimes wish we were back at Tawas Christian? I mean, not back in Tawas City, but just the classes. We thought they were so hard. We both laughed. God, we were wrong. Yeah, that was a whole different universe, bro. Shit was so easy compared to now. And there were only 14 of us in total. Well, unless you include Miss Davis, which is fucking crazy. 14? I think it was 15, man. He looked confused. Nah, bro. 14. Me, you, Aaron Engels, Tyler Mahoney, Zach O'Toole, that quiet girl named Grayson, Elizabeth Norman, that one kid, I don't remember his real name, but we all called him Taz. He called him Taz because he talked so fast nobody could hear what the fuck he was saying. I chuckled as I remembered him. There was Brian Reed, Amy, the twins George and Jordan Reynolds, and that one nerdy kid, Dylan, and then Miss Davis. That's 15, including her. And Eve. He squinted his eyes. Who? Eve, the shy girl, remember? Short, blonde, brown eyes, didn't talk to anybody? He shook his head. That was it, man. There were 14 of us. No, dude, I replied. There was Eve. I've been waiting for you to name her the whole time. He just looked at me like I was telling him bread was a liquid. Asher, are you messing with me? Stop, dude. I'm not messing with you. There just wasn't an Eve. I distinctly remember 14 of us, remember? 4 girls, 10 guys. No, I shook my head. 5 girls, 10 guys. That's how it was. Her name was Eve. She didn't talk to anybody, and we both never said anything to her. You're messing with me, and it isn't funny. I started to feel panicked. I've been reading all that shit about the Mandela Effect, and now you're trying to freak me out? Come on, stop it, man. Now he looked frustrated. Stop with that Mandela shit. There's no Eve. You're sleep deprived. What? I was getting annoyed, but also terrified. All this hysteria I'd embraced lately as I considered if the effect could be real left me feeling hopelessly crazy as Asher continued to argue with me. I knew there was an Eve. She went to Tawas Christian with us. Her face was easy for me to recreate in my mind. Sean, he looked at me intently. Are you fucking with me? No, I replied, trying not to sound panicked. It was such a simple situation. Asher just forgot about her. It was over a decade ago, and she wasn't by any means a notable student. She shied away from conversation, sitting in the back of the room with nothing to say. She only talked when she was forced to by Miss Davis, and none of us struck up conversation with her. Bro, you're just forgetting about her. She was quiet, man, like really quiet. First grade was a long damn time ago. Maybe, he shrugged. Honestly, though, no, I can't be. I can't be. I remember that class easily. There were 14 of us. You must be thinking about something else. Don't tell me I'm thinking about something else. I felt hopeless. The hell was that? He glared at me. Man, this isn't funny. You know that Mandela shit's been freaking me out. Please, Asher, stop. I pleaded. He looked horrified. Sean, I'm not fucking with you. Why are you getting so worked up, bro? Here. He slid me his coffee. Just relax, man. Relax. It's not a big deal. You're fine. She was there with us, Asher. Remember reading group? There were 15 of us. There were 5 of us in each group. Eve was in my group. No, man. I mean, you're right about there being 5 in each group, but Miss Davis was in a group, remember? No, she walked around and supervised, I argued. Asher, Eve was in my group. I know she was, because every time she was forced to read, she'd choke up and not say anything. And then the few times she did read, I was always enamored to actually be hearing her voice because I never did. Like, no one did. Asher was still and silent. Both of us knew what we knew, but none of us was wrong, right? Dude, I begged. Her car. Remember that at least? Her mom dressed nicely in a dress always. She'd come to pick Eve up in that fancy black car. Never gave a shit about cars, and I still don't. In my senior year of high school, I thought that Altima was a car make. I couldn't tell the difference between a Porsche and a Honda, but I remember her car because it was so nice looking. Probably a Cadillac or something. Come on, man. We used to always think it looked cool when it came into the pickup loop. Her mom was the first to arrive every day, and Eve would get up quickly from her lone corner on the bench and trudge over to the car. And her mom would come out dressed nicely, even if it was snowing, and hug her every single time. And she always smelled nice because her mom hugged her every morning too and got her perfume on her. Now Asher actually looked worried. Sean, he shook his head. I don't remember her. I'd say you're thinking of someone else from another school, but we've gone to the same school since first grade. And I don't remember her, ever. Maybe it was someone you met in preschool. No, we both talked about her. She was in my reading circle in Miss Davis's class. What about after that? You're only talking about first grade. I don't remember her after that. She must have moved. But she was in first grade. That's probably why you forget her. She moved and you just remember all of us that graduated 5th grade there. Nah, man. I remember first grade too. She wasn't there. Miss Davis was my favorite teacher. I remember that year easy. There wasn't a girl named Eve. I don't really know why, but I felt like crying. Imagine that all your life you never believed in ghosts. Then you see this horror movie or something and there's a scene where the main character's looking in a mirror and then his reflection stops following him and does its own thing and it's horrifying. After that, you just keep thinking about that scene because it scared you so much. But hey, it's just a movie. It's not real. And that's the only thing keeping you from never looking into mirrors again. But then you figure out the movie's based on a true story. Okay, anybody could say that. It's based on a true story, like all horror movies. Just because it could be true doesn't mean it is. Nothing's hitting close to home. And then it happens to you. You get out of the shower, you're drying off, and you happen to look into the mirror. You raise your towel to dry off your hair, but when your reflection comes into view, its arms are at its side and it's staring at you. Holy shit! You're terrified. It's real. It happened to you and there's no denying it. That's how I felt at that table. Maybe it wasn't as concrete, but I knew Eve was in that class. I remembered her. Like the back of my hand. But Asher didn't. Not at all. It was just like the bird on King Tut's burial mask, like the thinker's flimsy hand stretching the skin of his cheek, like the absent footage of Nelson Mandela's huge funeral in the early 90s. I felt like I was going to have a panic attack. For the rest of the day, I didn't study. I was too overwhelmed. I tried my hardest to assimilate Eve into a preschool memory, but she was incompatible. She didn't fit. She didn't fit in my old church. She didn't fit in my neighborhood growing up. She didn't fit anywhere but Miss Davis's first grade class. Finally, that night, I called my mother on the phone. At this point, I wasn't entirely convinced I was witnessing the Mandela Effect. Some part of me figured Asher had just smoked too much reefer in high school and forgot about her, and I knew how to find out if I was right. I told my mom that she wouldn't hear much from me this week because of all the studying I'd be doing, which she totally respected, so she was pretty surprised when I called her. Hey, Sean, she sounded excited. What's up? Hey, Mom, I wanted to ask you something. Do you remember a girl named Eve in Miss Davis's class? A short blonde girl with brown eyes? That's a random question, she replied. No, it doesn't ring a bell. On your 7th birthday, you invited over all the kids, but I don't remember an Eve. Yeah, I invited her, but she didn't come, I remembered. She was really shy. That's probably why you forgot her. Well, I have some pictures of you in first grade. I could send them to you, and you could point her out to me if you see her in them. Why are you asking anyway? Well, Asher doesn't remember her either. It's just weirding me out a little bit. I chuckled, trying to hide my nerves. Yeah, it'd be cool if you could send those pictures. Do you have the one of the whole class? The one with all 14 of you? The words left me severely uncomfortable. 15? There were 15 of us, Mom. No, 14, I thought. What the Fuck, I whispered. Mom, yeah, just send me the pictures if you can. Okay. Is everything okay, Sean? Just feeling weird. It's weird nobody remembers her. I don't have the class picture, she sighed. I wish I did. Asher's mom might. See if Asher can get it from her, but I'll send you the ones I have. Okay, thanks, Mom. We talked a bit longer after that, but my mind wasn't occupied by the conversation. All I could think about was Eve. I could remember her short body, her perfect posture, the quaint dresses she wore to class. I could remember her scent that to this day still appeared sometimes in supermarkets or in a lecture hall for a fading second, just long enough to remind me of first grade. I could remember her voice when she finally worked up the courage to read in our reading circle. I could remember everything about her. I knew I'd be able to point her out if she showed up in any of the pictures. Still, what bothered me was this. The Mandela Effect is a smooth criminal. It's articulate, pinpoint, exact. It leaves no trace behind. Here's what I mean. The thinker, for instance. A lot of people remember taking pictures with it. They know the thinker didn't look the way it does now when they took the picture, so they go back and find their old vacation album. Brushing the dust off and reluctantly finding them posing with their ex-wife before the statue. And all the work and awkwardness of thumbing through the old album was for nothing, because in the picture, the thinker is doing exactly what they remember it wasn't doing. Even weirder are the pictures that went viral of people standing right in front of the statue, posing with their fist against their head. They're in front of the damn thing. Don't you think they'd maybe notice it wasn't doing what they thought it was doing? And not pose incorrectly right in front of it? But maybe they're not complete idiots. Or just downright oblivious. Maybe when they took that picture there, it was pressing its fist against its skull. And then, when the Mandela Effect occurred at some untraceable, inexact moment in time, the picture changed. But only the statue. It left everything else that wasn't the statue the same, resulting in the bizarre image of posing incorrectly right in front of it. I knew that if this was the Mandela Effect I was dealing with, there'd be no point at all to receiving these pictures. Whether or not Eve was standing there when the picture was taken 13 years ago, she wouldn't show up in them. The only way to catch the Mandela Effect is through relative things, like the people posing wrong in front of the statue, and this wasn't relative. If the universe pulled Eve from existence, then she wouldn't be present in any of the Polaroids. But I wanted to check anyway. Maybe something would stand out. My mom sent 4 pictures. The first was of me, Asher, Brian, Reed, Taz, and Norman playing at aftercare one day in the mud. The second wasn't useful either, just me and Asher sitting at a picnic table one night at open house. The third picture, however, was interesting. It was of the Christmas concert. All 15 of us were taught 3 church songs to sing at the concert, and our parents came and watched. It was humiliating for all of us, except maybe Aaron, who was born to be a star, but it was especially embarrassing for Eve. This photo jogged my memory immediately, and what made it so strange was the formation of the girls. In the picture, you can see all of us on stage. There's a one riser on the stage, and some of us were standing on it, while the others were standing in front of the stage itself. On the left side are the boys, 5 in front and 5 on the riser. On the right are the girls, 3 in front and 1 on the riser. Between 2 of the girls, it looks like somebody's missing in the picture. You have Erin on the left, then Amy next to her, then Elizabeth next to her, and then Grayson is standing on the riser between Erin and Amy. Eve would fit perfectly between Amy and Elizabeth. Perfectly. Why the hell would they put 3 girls on the stage and 1 girl alone on the riser, asymmetrically, especially when the boys are lined up perfectly? It made no damn sense. And I remember Eve there that night, how scared she was. I remember her white dress and thinking that for once we were all dressed like her, and she didn't stand out. And I remember her crying backstage and being scared to death to go out and not singing the entire time, but just freezing up. I'd bet my soul that all that happened. The final picture was also useless. Just me and Brian Reed in a kickball game that we played on the last day of school. Brian Reed was trying to peg me out, and I'm running like a madman for first base. I saved that picture of the Christmas concert on my phone. It was just the proof I needed to show Asher. The next day, when I ran into Asher, I showed him the picture. To my surprise, this actually affected him. He seemed nervous when he started to consider how weird the picture looked. He told me that if I had mentioned Eve now, after he'd seen the picture, he would have just thought it was a coincidence. But since I mentioned Eve before either of us had seen it, that made it a lot stranger. Still, he wasn't ready to believe in the Mandela Effect. Not like I was. But he was curious enough to ask his mother if she had our class picture. She did. Both of us watched anxiously for her to send it. I couldn't remember anything about the picture. Still, I wanted to see if there was a strange placement of students like the Christmas concert, and so did Asher. When he got the message, both of us were shaking with anxiousness. The moment I saw it, I gasped. "Remember? I jumped the bee sting!" "Huh?" Asher flinched, startled by my screaming. "Asher!" I grabbed him. "See how we're standing like that? It was because of Eve." Miss David stood in the middle of us, 7 of us on her left and 7 of us on her right. Those on her left were turning slightly to face her, thus the left side of their faces were showing and the right side were blocked. And those on her right were turned leftward, so their right was facing the photographer. What stood out was the ample negative space in the picture. When groups pose in this fashion, it's a way to shrink the size of the group. Usually, the cameraman has trouble fitting all the people in the shot, and thus they form this way so they can all scrunch up and fit, but still look natural. But in this picture, it's easy to see that we had more than enough room to stand correctly and still fit. That wasn't the reason we stood this way. "Asher," I felt as if I'd struck in gold. "We're all posed like this because Eve got stung by a bee. Dude, tell me you remember. We were going in to take the picture and she got stung right under her right eye. Her face got all swollen and she was crying because she didn't want to look like that in the picture. So the photographer said to pose like this, and Eve could turn the left side of her face to the camera." "Dude," Asher scratched his head, "we just posed like this so we could save room." "No, we didn't. There's no reason to do that. There's so much room on the left and right side. It's unnatural even. We wouldn't have done it for that reason." I don't remember anything like that happening, man. Honestly, this is starting to weird me out. I think we should just forget about it. I can't forget about it, I replied. She was real. I can't believe nobody can remember her. There was only one option left for me to do. I had to have a reunion with them. If we all met up and others of us remembered Eve, I'd know I wasn't crazy. Most of us hadn't spoken in years. Still, I had Erin as my friend on Facebook. She talked all the time about having a reunion, and now that we were all in our 20s, and I knew if I mentioned it, she'd ruthlessly try to put it together. I contacted her that night, and she was completely on board. All of us were about to be free from college for winter break, and I suggested we meet back in Tawas City. I was going down there anyway to see my family for Christmas. My mom had long suggested I throw a reunion at the house. She said she'd be honored to host and cater it. When I told Erin about it, she couldn't be more compliant. She assured me she'd contact the others, all 15, she said. My heart raced. I asked, "All 15? "Yeah," she responded, "all 15. Us and Miss Davis." And at that moment, I felt another sense of dread. Erin always tried to keep the group together. Her forgetting Eve meant something was seriously wrong. When December 18th arrived, I was shocked to pull into my old driveway. I hadn't been there in years. Usually on Christmas, they came down to Tallahassee to visit me. It wasn't anything against them. I just hated Tawas City. Around Christmas time, it was freezing cold, and most of its residents went south for the winter if they could afford it. It was a ghost town, and a frigid one at that. My parents had picked me up from the airport and driven me here. The entire way, I reminisced. As we passed through the frozen-over cornfields under the bleak white sky, I felt like I'd been here yesterday. Nothing was different. It was all completely unrecognizable. Perhaps the only difference was some of the old buildings looked somehow even older, even more decrepit and abandoned. Throughout the drive, and especially when I go back to my house before anyone else arrived, really all I could think about was Eve. I felt closer to her here in this ominous, forgotten town. Back entrenched in the snow, something I hadn't felt in years, I sensed that she was in arm's reach of me. I just knew that if I were to ever find closure, it'd be at this reunion. If just one other person remembered her, then I wasn't crazy. Then the Mandela Effect was real, and if Eve was real, and Asher was wrong, God, I prayed for that closure. At 4 o'clock, all of us that could make it arrived. Miss Davis was unfortunately busy with her family as her father was dying and they didn't know how much time he had left, and Norman was completely untraceable. The last of us to hear from him was Brian Reed, who remembered Norman getting into trouble sometime around 8th grade and going to juvenile detention. After that, he pretty much vanished. Not like Eve, though. He was still in the pictures. They still remembered his name. When the other 12 showed up at the house, I forgot about Eve for just a moment. Seeing Erin again was awesome. She was as beautiful and energetic as always, her long brown hair now styled maturely, and her vibrant green eyes now only wiser. Tyler Mahoney was also just as handsome as he'd always been. The stud was still dressed to kill, even in the freezing weather. Brian Reed had joined the Navy and was on Liberty. He was even bigger now than he was then, and was engaged to his girlfriend since high school. Grayson, on the other hand, was not favored by time. She looked older than she was, remained far shorter than most of us, and her face was covered with acne. Still, she was a lot more outgoing than any of us could remember. Zach looked a lot like how I remembered, tan, skinny. The only difference was now he had a mustache. He worked at Home Depot ever since high school and was still living with his parents that moved to Minnesota. Amy was unrecognizable. She had bright blue hair now, which wasn't necessarily a surprise, considering how rebellious she was growing up, but the piercings were unprecedented. Elizabeth was much like she always was, generally quiet and sweet with her alluring amber eyes that nobody could forget. Dylan didn't look the way any of us thought he would. He was now ravishing, tall, and wore rich stubble along his grand face. He still wore glasses, and I'm glad. Contacts on Dylan would have just been staggering. He had a higher GPA than even Aaron, and all of us were proud of him. George and Jordan both looked a lot different now. George was a construction worker and was wiry and stout. Jordan, on the other hand, was more reserved and amusingly taller than his twin brother George. Jordan's hair was neat and short. George's hair was a thick mess of black curls. They didn't even speak the same anymore. George spoke profanely, and George seemed to be a stranger to vulgarities. It was intriguing to see them so different. Taz was just as goofy as ever. To our surprise, he'd been going to college and was working on a business degree, but when he talked about something he was passionate about, you couldn't understand a word he was saying. The moment he stepped inside, he blabbered on and on and on, and all we could do was laugh. He was just as crazy as ever. Asher and I were generally believed to look the same. Asher's hair was still red, mine still brown. His eyes were still green, mine blue. His face was still freckly, mine smooth. He was still a prankster, and I was still quiet most of the time. The only difference was both of us were more in shape since we started running together. But the complacent joy of seeing all my friends again only distracted me for a short while. Before long, my thoughts were back on Eve. I waited for her to come in the door, but I knew she never would. I waited for somebody to mention her, but I knew it would never happen. With Miss Davis and Norman accounted for, everyone was here. It disheartened me, to say the least. Maybe I was crazy. Maybe I read too much about the Mandela Effect and that bee sting that was just the power of suggestion, and that Christmas concert picture was just weird. Maybe I dreamed of Eve once, or she was in my preschool and I just screwed it all up in my head. There was no way to be sure. After dinner, we all went to the living room and talked. I tried to enjoy myself, but something just felt wrong. Eve should have been there. It bothered me so much that no one had asked about her, and I knew I had to bring her up. But I didn't want to look crazy. Asher had asked me not to mention her, and I didn't want to annoy him. I also wasn't prepared to hear them tell me they remembered her. What would I do then? I wouldn't be delusional, but then what? The horror of trying to accept what became of her? That would be close to impossible. I wanted so badly to hear from someone that she was real, but I didn't know how I'd ever forget her if I had to really imagine the universe forgetting her, bumping shoulders with some alternate dimension and ripping her from the snowstorms of Tawas City to some other place light years away. With the exception of a few things that were just eerily different. I wanted to stay quiet. I wanted to just forget about her, but I knew that wasn't an option. I didn't know what was more disturbing to me, the Mandela Effect happening so close to home in my life, or me being this delusional. Either way, I had to know. I couldn't hold it any longer. Hey guys, I spoke up nervously. I need to ask you all a question. Asher looked disappointed. What's up, Sean? Brian Reed asked. Look, this might sound weird, but where's Eve? I was thinking that the whole time, Tyler Mahoney spoke up, and my heart stopped. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't crazy. Somebody else remembered her. And no one else did. There was confused silence devouring the room now. Asher looked as if he'd seen a ghost. I myself was horrified and at the same time overwhelmed with relief. Eve? Aaron asked. Eve who? I don't remember her last name. Quiet, short blonde chick, wore a dress all the time. Holy shit, Asher whispered, bewildered. Holy shit. Am I missing something? Amy asked. There was a girl named Eve in our first grade class. I spoke up, but nobody remembers her. At least I thought nobody did. I chuckled nervously. But Tyler, you do. Man, I thought I lost my fucking mind. She's not in any of the pictures, not a damn one. There's no sign of her ever existing except for my memories, and I swear to God I thought I'd gone off the deep end. But Tyler, you remember her too. Oh my God, that brings me so much closure. There was no Eve, Dylan responded. I don't recall an Eve. I remember each of you distinctly. I can't imagine how I've forgotten one of you completely, and yet vividly remembered the rest of you. I agree, Jordan chimed in. There were 4 girls. I remember that easily. There wasn't a 5th. Yeah, there was, Tyler replied, which gave me so much peace. I had a crush on her, remember? Not to sound like a douchebag, but all you girls liked me. He faced them, and none could deny it. But then I had a crush on Eve, and... The note! I burst into uproarious laughter, recalling it instantly. Yeah! Tyler laughed. The room was portentously silent. I liked Eve, Tyler chuckled. Nobody knew why I liked her because she was all silent and standoffish, but I just fell for her. So I wrote her this super corny, embarrassing note, and I went to hand it to her. And you got caught, I finished, just wanting to see it all line up again. And Miss Davis confiscated it, and everybody wanted to know what it said because when she read it, she started laughing her head off. And it was the most embarrassing day of my life, he grinned. You guys don't remember? Most of them looked uncomfortable. I don't remember an Eve, Elizabeth spoke with certainty. Never do I remember that name. I don't remember the day you're talking about, and we all certainly did used to snicker about you. She smiled but looked troubled. All of us girls, I think we'd remember that. It happened, Tyler shrugged. How would Sean and I remember the same thing? Exactly the same thing, and it not really happen? And how would everyone remember the thinker's fingers balled into a confident fist when they were in fact flaccidly poking his chest? And how would everyone remember King Tutankhamun's burial mass with its lone snake as its crowning feature when all along there was a lucid, brightly constructed bird immediately beside it? And how would everyone remember Nelson Mandela's untimely fate in a downtrodden South African prison, resulting in monstrous civil unrest, vividly recorded footage of his ubiquitously aired funeral, and the tear-jerking lamentation delivered by his widow in passing, when all of it never fucking happened? It's because something disturbing and unthinkable occurred. Something that none of us will ever explain happened, emasculating the thinker's resolute stoicism to a pose of deep uncertainty, producing the unnatural bird like a blackhead on King Tut's burial mask. and turning Nelson Mandela into a zombie who lived unnoticed until he passed away again in 2013, leaving those of us remembering differently absolutely baffled. Well, that's just really weird. Aaron's words were the catharsis the room looked for. No matter what Eve's existence, or lack thereof, meant none could disagree that it was, in fact, just really weird. We changed the subject afterward, and most of us seemed to move on rather quickly from the enigma. But I didn't. It bothered me the entire time, gnawing at me. I wanted to sit and talk with Tyler about Eve all night. I wanted to hear all the stories about her that he remembered. I was dying to ask him if he recollected the bee sting story. But it just never came up. I couldn't ask it. I didn't want to visit it anymore. I did something to me that I can't explain to imagine. That little girl being stung in the eye, crying before picture day in our snowy, empty town. The memory alone was enough to make me tremble. That poor little girl, showing the left side of her chubby face to the camera. Where was she now? Why couldn't anyone remember? I did my best to. Just forget. But Eve was stuck in my head. I knew I'd never forget about her. The Mandela Effect was real. She really did exist once. And now she didn't. What the hell happened to her then? I mean, really? It was just too terrifying to think about, and I couldn't forget it, no matter how desperately I tried. Asher seemed to be in my boat. Most of them stayed the night at my house, since there wasn't a motel in the entire town, and the majority of our parents had moved. The next day, everyone was out of town except me, having flown out back to the land of the living. Only I stayed behind in the snow-scoured wasteland of Tawas City, Michigan. Only I remained in this hot spot of the universe, this place where two realities collided. I didn't receive the closure I'd wanted from the reunion. We all exchanged numbers and were staying in touch now, which was great, but more than anything, I was constantly bombarded by thoughts of Eve. I just wanted something to make sense. I stayed awake late at night thinking about her voice that I could so simply recall, reading to us "The bird is on your head" and Max's words. I remembered her so scared at social events and huddling through the snow, still wearing a dress, though adorned with mittens and a scarf, toward her loving mother, where they'd hug outside her fancy black car. I remembered Eve's crying when the bee stung her eye. That memory, for some reason, bothered me more than the others. It just affected me. Something about it really cut deep. She was so innocent. I felt so bad for her, and now she wasn't the victim of a simple bee sting, but of some horrible cosmic event leaving her non-existent. My parents wanted me to stick around until Christmas, but the thought of that killed me. I didn't want to stay in this wasteland for a week. I hated it, and now I was scared to death here. Would I get ripped from my reality into the cosmos? It happened here once already. This mystery just consumed the town to me, drenching it and leaving me constantly reminded of Eve, the girl that stopped existing. Days passed, and all I did was sit in the living room and watch TV. I enjoyed seeing my parents when they were around, but both worked, and this meant I spent a lot of time alone at the house, which I abhorred. Eventually, I dug through my old closet to find something that might be from first grade. I didn't find anything. I did, however, hold in my hands the picture that Eve was yanked from. The one where she should be between Elizabeth and Amy, but she isn't. She's not there. And there's just that unnatural space in between. Bastard universe, it's so smug, so omnipotent that it can leave clues as gaping as this, and yet still there's just no way to prove she's real. But then, on Christmas Eve, it happened. I got a text from Tyler. "Sean, I read up on the Mandela Effect. That shit's got me fucked up. I think that is what happened. But I remember something now, and this might really prove Eve existed for sure. The note I wrote her. You stole it. You took it off Miss Davis's desk and gave it back to me, but then I told you to keep it and throw it away. You told me later on that you never threw it away, but took it home and showed your parents and laughed your ass off every time you read it. Where is it? If you still have it, it'll be proof. Holy shit, I gasped when I read the text. Holy shit, you're completely right, Tyler. I'm gonna find that note. I swear to God I will. And when I do, I'll send you pictures. Then we can prove she's for sure real. Now I know what some of you are thinking. Wouldn't the note not exist now too? Well, no. See, when the Mandela Effect occurs, only things directly relating to what was changed are altered. That's why the people posing in front of the thinker are still posing wrong. That's why the cartoons in which King Tut's mask has one snake on it and no birds still look like that. The only thing changed is the real deal. So the actual pictures of Eve, they're gone. She's been pulled from them, and there's not a trace of her remaining. But the note, if I found it, would be just the proof I needed. It would mention her by name. My dad told me that I could feel free to check the storage unit for the note. Apparently there he'd placed a lot of the crap I didn't clean in my closet growing up, and if it was anywhere, it'd be there. I even faintly remember stealing it now like the rotten kid I was and reading it from time to time for a good laugh. Some part of me wanted to wait until my dad got off work to check the storage unit with him, but I knew somehow that I'd never find the note if he was there. I felt like I had to do it alone. I drove there through the snow on a day just as bleak and silent as any other in Taos. I passed the lonely cornfields, the ominous tower-like silos, the seemingly empty fish shops, and the frozen harbor. It was all just how it always was. When I got to the storage unit, I was strangely horrified. I felt like I was about to walk into a haunted house. As a kid, the storage unit always scared me. In all my life, I know as a fact, I've never seen another soul in that building, other than my father. It was always dark and empty, and now, without him by my side, searching for this letter about a ghost, I was mortified. But I continued on. I entered the frigid, voluminous metal halls, journeying through them and turning on the lights as I stepped into each corridor. Finally, I arrived at our unit. I dreaded lifting the door. It made a frighteningly loud creak. It unsettled me to hear it, even though I was the one making the noise. I lifted the door as quietly as possible, which wasn't quiet at all, then began my hunt. I looked for over an hour. I could barely reach the boxes in the back, and each one was filled to the brim with junk, usually sporting a silverfish or two. But then I found it, my baseball cards. These were from the first grade. They were in a plastic container, barely visible under the pile of junk in which it resided. But I grabbed the box, sliding it out of its tomb and into my arms. I opened the container. Inside were the baseball cards, a Berenstain Bears book, fucking creepy, and spelled with an A, of course, some doodles and old notebooks, and a folded up letter. I recognized it instantly. I held it in my hands. Now, in the lonely, cold, silent, eerie storage unit, I caressed the piece of evidence the universe forgot. I slid open the old paper, hardly able to breathe as I searched for the name. I unfolded it. Dear Eve. That was all I had to read. Dear Eve. Dear Eve. Dear Eve. I folded it up, slid it into my pocket, took a long, deep breath, leaning against a pile of dusty boxes. Eve was real. The girl that stopped existing was really here once in this graveyard of a town, and I wasn't crazy. And somehow, some way, two universes collided, and Eve was ripped into oblivion by the silver fingers of the cosmos, vacuumed from existence without a single trace, except my memories. Tyler's memories, and the note in my hand. What happened to her? Where was she now? Was she alive? Where was that sweet, quiet, sobbing girl? And would I ever know? Probably not. She's in a place where Curious George has a tale, and where children grew up reading the Berenstain Bears. She was taught that Nelson Mandela died in a South African prison, and when she pretends to be the thinker, she isn't posing wrong. I hope. Or maybe she's nothing now. Maybe the universe made a tragic mistake and that harmless girl will never trudge into her mother's loving arms again, but instead spend eternity scared to death, trapped in the swirling gray snow. I have no idea. But as I sat there, all I could do was imagine the ghost of her sitting there with me. I felt so close to her in that place that time forgot, in that meaningless metal room, trapped in a town in which the universe made a mistake. When I finally flew back to Tallahassee, I couldn't be more relieved. I vowed that I would never return to Tawas City, Michigan, no matter what the reason. As far as I was concerned, it was better left behind, like Eve was. But like usual, I just couldn't escape her. I texted pictures of the note to Asher and Tyler. Both were equally as messed up. We all just tried to put it behind us, though. And then Miss Davis updated her Facebook. "I'm sorry I couldn't make the reunion," she posted, "but I just want to say that I'll make the next one for sure. It's my favorite class ever." She also published a picture, a drawing from Elizabeth. It was a drawing of the class. It was clearly drawn by a child, amateurish, simple, messy, and colored pencil. But simple as it was, there was nothing normal about it. It was a drawing of 10 little boys and a drawing of 5 little girls. A drawing of a short blonde girl with brown eyes and what could only be distinguished as a dress. I don't know how anybody else reacted to that, but I know I'll never unsee that image. Even now, all these years later, sometimes she comes to mind. I can't help it. I've seen horrible and unexplainable things in my life. 2 towers destroyed by hijacked planes for no reason at all other than sheer hatred, leaving thousands dead. A preschool invaded by an active shooter that employed military tactics, killing little children, and entirely unprovoked by anything. But none of it affects me anymore. Then Eve. The girl the universe forgot. Woo! That was trippy. Trippy. Woo! Man, that kind of like, it was weird, but it kind of hurt my feelings a little bit. I'm sad. But yeah, we did it, guys. We made it 2 hours and 40 minutes later. That was fun. It was a good time. Good read. All that good shit. I hope everybody had fun. I hope everyone enjoyed themselves. But yeah, I'm probably going to take off. I'm a little tired. Yep, totally agree, Roger. That's some wild shit. No, here's the thing, though. I am one of those people who remembered the Berenstain Bears. Like the STEIN, not the STAIN. That shit fucked me up. I was like, what the fuck? What do you mean it's not Berenstain? It's definitely Berenstain, not Berenstain. So when I read about the Mandela Effect, I was like, nah, fucking get out of here with that shit. I don't want to even, we don't bring that bad juju in here. I don't want to hear it. But yeah, that shit was wild, dude. Crazy. But I hope everyone had a good time. I had a great time reading stories with you guys. Hey, Joe Della Rosa. But yeah, I'm going to take off because I'm super tired. My voice needs to rest a little bit. And I'm probably going to make some food because I'm hungry. See, that shit messes with me so bad, Rabid Pink Bunny. Like, it's fucking, I remember it was Berenstain. Like, I could swear it was Berenstain growing up. And then when someone was just like, no, it's Berenstain, I was like, get the fuck out of here. Don't even bring that shit into me. The music at the beginning and end of my videos, I think there were tracks that like I randomly purchased from like whitelisted audio libraries. And will there be more Fields pastas and no sleep stories? Yes, those will be coming, I promise. Like I said, I got a lot of recording done this week. It's part of the reason why I'm kind of tired, to be honest. But yeah, I got a lot of recording done this week, and I'm gonna work on putting videos together and uploading them. Bacon for food. I never knew the Thinker was involved either. I knew Curious George with the tail was involved, and of course Nelson Mandela dying in prison, and the Berenstain bullshit, but I definitely remember it was Berenstain growing up. Like, I could swear it was the Berenstain Bears, not the Berenstain Bears, but hey, you know, whatever. Shit happens. Our minds are wild. And I thought he had a closed fist too, the Thinker. But you know, honestly, it's because like it's depicted in, you know, Looney Tunes cartoons and different forms of media where they have like this spoof kind of like Hanna-Barbera bullshit, and it's him with a fist and not his hand like in a palm. So yeah, I didn't know about the Monopoly Man, but yeah, that shit's wild to me for sure. But yeah, I hope that didn't fuck you up guys up too bad. I had a good time. I love reading about the Mandela Effect. Oh my god, don't say that shit to me. Don't, Queenie, don't. I can't. Now my brain is like in sensory overload and I'm like gonna fry myself out. This is just proof that I'm from a different universe and I just like walk through some weird veil of like time, space continuum bullshit, and there's another version of me living in a different like timeline A-B bullshit. This kind of reminds me of this movie that I watched with Tommy the other day called The Call. And at the end of the movie, like, it's specifically set up to be like two different timelines. It's fucking wild to me. Oh Lord, we're starting his shit. It's like he doesn't have a monocle. It's like, yes he does. I'm like, oh god. Oh my god, Malediction Wolf, stop. But yeah, I definitely remember Berenstain Bears, not Stain Bears. And fucking... the Fruit Loops, oh Lord, help. Well, tell me, I hope you didn't remember the Monopoly Man having a monocle. Because I did, and now I'm upset. I can't handle this multiverse bullshit. This isn't fair. I didn't ask for this. Queenie, what have you done to me? Oh my god, tell me. Listen, I can't. I gotta go. I gotta go. I've got to go. I can't handle this. I can't deal with it. I can't. There's so much yelling. This is hurting your brain now. Same, fam, same. Agreed. That's a good way to look at it, Tommy. What is in your brain is in your brain, and you're keeping it there. We're all the glitch. We are all glitches in the matrix. And on that note, we will end the stream there. Everyone get some rest, relax. If your day is just starting, make sure you eat and take care of yourself. If your day is winding down, have a great night. Enjoy yourselves. Relax. Make sure you do some self-care. And I will see you guys next week for the next stream. And look forward to a new video coming out. Yeah, have a beer. Thanks, guys. Have a great night. I love you all. You are the best. And until next time, bye.